Yeah, so the last few days of things. So not particularly well. I so I started having a skim through your grammar material, the uh, more advanced stuff.
Yep.
Um, though didn't really like. I was just skimming through it to see what was in there. I've finished reading the grammar article properly, so I've read the last bit a few times. It seems pretty straightforward. Uh, a lot of it was sort of matched up with intuition and things like that, so that was good. Um, Otherwise I was reasonably unproductive, and one of the things I was thinking about today was to think about, or to see if we wanted to cover anything about what to do in these sort of cases, where I feel like I've, um, not, uh, I don't know, there's sort of a combination of things, behavior-wise, not doing the things that I sort of wanted to do, but then I'm not sure what other components there are as such.
Okay. Let's start with grammar. Did you have any questions?
Um, I think it's all like most of the stuff was fine. Um, One of the things that did occur to me is you mentioned explicitly putting objects and complements as two different sentence patterns. Um, I've sort of
Yeah,
like,
action
oh yeah,
verb versus linking verb.
mm. So um, I don't know, I haven't so I wasn't really exposed to that idea before starting working on grammar with you. Um, I haven't really like I don't feel well. I feel like I've got like half a intuition for action verb versus linking verb. There's sort of the easy stuff, where if it's physically describing an action, then it's pretty straightforward. Um, but I'm also not sure like if it matters.
It doesn't matter a ton. The reason I included it in my article, I was tempted to exclude it, but it is completely ingrained in how grammar is taught and all the standard views on it. It's just part of our society and our culture and how English is thought about.
So if we didn't put it in, it'd just be too confusing for anyone who's studied some stuff before, sort
Yeah,
of thing. That makes sense. Um, and that's, I mean, yeah, basically what you said. But just wanted to wonder if there was anything more to that. Um,
it's primarily it just comes up with differentiating be from other verbs. All the other linking verbs are a bit uncommon.
yeah, okay. Um, what
So
are
when
the
you're
other?
saying something
Well,
is
sorry.
something, it's different than an action. And
Yeah.
in particular, you can have an adjective after instead of a noun. Other
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
action, yeah, other linking verbs are, for example, John smelled gross is a linking verb,
Yeah. Okay.
because smelling, so the verb smell can be an action verb if it's like I smelled the roses. In that case, you're taking an action. But when you smell gross, you're not actually acting, you're sort of being something. Similarly, John turned green is a linking verb because that one's actually confusing, but there's not actually an action happening. Like John
Ye-
is not doing an action.
Yeah. So I was just thinking like I jumped enthusiastically. Um, for example, there sort of feels like there's a generalization with ed, um, because uh, we can sort of describe the action without talking about a subject or complement. Oh well, no, the complement is just the other side, right? Is like enthusiastically.
Okay, so here's a good list. The main ones, these are all be related ones. And then they also have become and seem, anything related to become or seem or be. Those are the commoner ones. And then the less common ones, they have look, smell, touch, appear, sound, taste, feel. Can be linking verbs. So like John looks cool
Okay.
is a link, whereas John looked at the pig is an action.
So I jumped enthusiastically jumped is not a linking verb in that case, and it's
Right,
just
jumping's an action.
the sentence is just um like pronoun verb adverb.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So both of the sentences. Oh, well, I guess in the case of the linking verb, it's not an adverb; it's an adjective, particularly, right?
Yes. Linking verbs
Yeah,
can
okay.
have an adjective where you would normally have an object, but for an
Mhm.
action verb, the object is always a noun. So other linking verbs are turn, remain, prove, grow. So all of these are not that big a deal. It's not going to make that much difference to how you read things or your understanding. So you can just memorize them or not worry that much about them. I think it's worth at least remembering the main ones though, be and maybe become and seem. If you remember that those are links instead of actions,
Hmm.
it'll cover most cases.
Yeah, okay. I haven't really noticed any problem with it, like in terms of it. I don't know how it would be holding me back necessarily, but
Yeah, it does not change the tree structure of the sentence. And you conceptually understand linking verbs like is already, like you know what the word means, so it works okay.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Um,
But yeah,
yeah, so
here are some of the most common linking verbs. So as you can see, there aren't that many and they aren't that common.
yeah, no, that sort of makes sense. The other thing, just on that sort of topic, you mentioned, or it talks about like English has these patterns, and basically we can't express things outside of these patterns, and it's more restrictive than we realize potentially. Um,
Yes. Right. We
do
do
you
sometimes use sentence fragments or something, but
hmm,
they're problematic.
um, do you know of any like good examples of uh, like languages that break this pattern and like the sorts of things they express?
No, I have not researched that. My vague understanding is that there's broad themes throughout languages. Um, so you'll find major similarities in other languages, like having a subject and a verb and having a noun-verb distinction, I think.
Yep.
I think some people suspect that of being universal, basically, but I haven't
Yeah.
looked into the details and what weird exceptions they found.
Yep. No, that sort of makes sense. I imagine that there's a lot of like emergent things that have sort of emerged or, come about in like lots of languages, even if we don't understand precisely why, because
Yeah,
no alternatives get found.
yeah. So the main categories of English are nouns, verbs, modifiers, and linking words, conjunctions, prepositions, relative. Anyway, we basically have four sorts of concepts, like things, actions, details, and glue words.
Yep.
So those are very broad and principled, I think. I mean, I'm certainly biased, I'm from my culture, but it looks to me like a fairly minimal list covering essential concepts in a reasonable way.
Yeah, I have heard people talk about like it seems like languages sometimes have names for other stuff, but they're sort of just special cases, like how we have like determiners that are basically just adjectives.
Yes, right, and we even have articles, which is just the, a, and an. There's only three articles, but we have a special word for that category for some reason.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's just
Uh,
parochial.
mm. Um, Other than that, I mean the final grammar stuff, like it's pretty general. I haven't read the using commas thing. I did start doing one of the first I think they were the owl
Yeah.
exercises that listed that Alyssa was doing, but uh yeah, but sort of didn't really I've done like two exercises of that.
Yeah. commas are not that important for the main principles and concepts, but they come up pretty frequently.
Yep. Yep. I feel like I've got a reasonable intuition about commas, so I'm gonna try and gauge that and um,
Yeah,
see.
my
I don't think
article
that
is
I.
pretty short anyways.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Other than that, I don't think there was particularly like any questions about this stuff. The yeah, there's sort of those questions about like other languages or alternate concepts or stuff, but it makes sense that I mean they're a bit outside the scope of this in any case.
Yeah,
Um, I guess as a follow-on, as for someone who's like considering that we've gone through this, the I did notice the start of the grammar stuff is going over the article,
yep.
and I sort of skimmed through that and listened to bits. Um, I'm not sure whether there would be much point sort of going through it in any detail, considering what we've done now. So I guess the other thing is like, yeah, how do you imagine me going through this in terms of like, I guess where should I start if we're not in a tutorial, and if we are in a tutorial, um, what's um, I'm presuming the audio is not working properly. Sounds like
Sounds
it
like it
might
might
be
be
a
a.
Testing.
hey.
Okay, it's working again.
Okay. Did you get everything I was saying, or did that
No,
cut out? Okay.
it all
Um,
cut out. I think it was my
uh,
headphones.
okay. Um, I was just asking how. So given that we've gone through the grammar article and
Oh, yeah, I started answering. I
oh,
think
okay, yeah,
it's fine to use it as a review and play it at 2x or whatever, and slow down if you have any problems or confusions. And if everything's fine, then don't worry about it.
yeah, okay, yeah. That was roughly what I was doing to the parts I listened to. So, um,
Okay,
cool. Um, yeah, so I think that was in terms of the grammar stuff. That was the only questions I had.
okay, so let's talk about motivation and procrastination stuff.
Yep. So I started just before this drawing up like a little bit of a tree of the stuff, I guess, that I've been thinking about this thing. Um, I sort of there's a bit of a pattern with longer and shorter periods and stuff, so I gave it a name as evasion periods because that seems to typify what I do in those periods. But yeah,
Okay, the big idea when people don't do stuff in general, and they don't have an obvious reason, like sometimes you know the reason, I'm not doing that because it's too expensive, for
mhm,
example. But if you're having trouble figuring out the reason, or it seems like emotions or motivation or something, the big idea is you're not fully persuaded. You have some sort of objections or criticism in your mind. You're conflicted.
yeah. Now my so I've thought about this. So just as a bit of background, I suppose. Sorry, excuse me. The so stuff like I'm pretty sure because I think I've talked a bit about it on FI before, and I've read um, emotions and things, or sorry, emotions and other. I don't know which other articles particularly. but other articles that you've written about it. I roughly agree. The big question that would come up at the moment is what happens with outside stuff. So it's like uh, there's like in the way that we do things in life, we have lots of or multiple tracks. So we have work and personal life are ways that people often separate those stuff. Um,
Uh-huh.
and when there's crossover in the sense that like I want to be doing work stuff, but I'm distracted because I'm going through a divorce, something like that. Uh, I can sort of see the not fully persuaded thing there, but it feels a bit roundabout in that it's, um, yeah, I don't know. Do those indirect cases matter as much as when we just don't
So
want to do the thing itself?
so in the case of the divorce, you have a reason, you're busy with something else. You're not fully persuaded that you should spend less time dealing with your divorce, or you'd be spending more time elsewhere. But um, right, yeah. So the divorce is important. It merits attention. The reason you're still spending attention on it is you actually need to think about it and deal with it properly and so on. So it's consuming attention for a good reason. So uh, you're not necessarily doing anything wrong, like by prioritizing it.
Yeah,
You
okay.
should maybe
So,
just be satisfied because you're prioritizing in a reasonable way.
um, so we're like, yeah, this extends both to like direct avoidance of something where you just don't want to do it, you're not convinced you should be doing it, and then uh, cases where you're trying to do something, but essentially you have a bigger problem, and that's when you keep getting distracted or whatever else by the bigger
Yeah.
problem. Yep,
People make a lot of excuses and they look for problems and things to get distracted by. But a divorce is an example of one that's not just an excuse. Like those are really distracting.
it's not you know did I leave the oven on when I left the house type thing, which maybe could be serious, but if you're thinking about it all the time, then it's probably not.
Yeah, if it's just I'm in a bad mood, you have to be a lot more suspicious.
Yep, yep. Um, okay. And then so sometimes there are obvious cases where there's like things going on. But I guess the
Yeah, especially when there's a time limit. Like, this divorce will be done in 2 months. If you only accept excuses with time limits, you're going to be in a much better position than people who accept open-ended excuses.
yeah, because there's like pass fail criteria for that sort of thing essentially.
Yeah, and
Like when you have an open,
it's temporary, is the main point.
yeah, okay, yeah,
Now, if you have a string of temporary things and you keep finding new ones, that's a bad sign. But if you have one or two important temporary things, that's perfectly reasonable.
yeah,
But when it's a longer term issue, then you have to think about how is your life organized and what do you want to do in your life and how can you rearrange your life and restructure it so that you have more time for X and less time for Y or whatever.
yeah.
Um, and if you find you're not doing that, if you resist doing that, if it never happens, then that is an indication that you like something about Y. You like something about the thing you're trying to get rid of. A lot of
Yep.
times people think certain things are rational and good, and other things are irrational, bad, biased, hedonistic, etc. And they're overly dismissive of things that they currently like, and they try to get rid of them. And then they find that's hard and takes a lot of willpower and so on because they're fighting with themselves and they haven't actually done enough analysis of what is better and what they actually want in their lives. Sometimes the
Yeah.
rationalism is pretty extreme, like these people who are like, caring about food taste is irrational. I should just eat white rice only, plus like nutrient pills,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Um,
they just have trouble justifying any sort of luxury or fun whatsoever, and they think they should just read books instead or something.
so I mean, I guess the one thing I was thinking about this morning was how do you approach something when and I was sort of thinking about this from a yes no perspective, but not particularly. Um, that came into it. But how do you approach something when you don't know the problem itself? Like you know a problem exists. Well, we do know a problem. I guess we don't know the solution, which is like with I guess when thinking about your own mind, it's harder because of uh, like you have to do creative work to really get clarity on the problem. It's much harder than like analyzing something outside, where it's easier to ask like probing questions, I guess, and get honest answers, or at least more directed answers. Sorry, this is a bit stream of consciousness thoughts at the moment, but yeah, like
Yeah, I didn't totally follow, but some problems are
sorry.
unclear and it's hard to do introspection to figure out what's going on, and they don't have a lot of overt evidence. Is that the main idea?
Yeah, like particularly when I've tried for I don't know years when I have periods. So some of these periods of like what I'd call evasion periods, I've sort of mentioned here that there's like maybe one or two phenomena. I'm not exactly sure, but the longer ones, um, I've tried to sort of each time I have one to sort of try and figure out what's going on. Um, and so I have like a few ideas. The main idea, heavily influenced by the stuff that I've like, stuff like the emotions article, is essentially on a mismatch between what I like actually value and what I'm doing, so that I'm like not doing things that I value, and this builds up over 6 to 12 months sort of thing, um, to a period where I like strongly try and, or at an opportunity, but strongly try and like remove myself from that and all other situations, sort of thing. In that,
Yeah,
um,
okay. That's fairly common. So you think you should be doing more intellectual stuff, you got sucked into other things, you got fed up with it, then you force a bunch of intellectual stuff and binge it, and then you burn out or get tired of it and go back, is a common pattern.
yeah, that's
So
yeah,
my first comment is you said the part where you got frustrated or aren't doing enough is something like you're not doing the things you value. That was your description, right?
yeah. Well, I have particular reasons for believing that, but I'm not sure if they are general. Um, so particularly, it's like what I notice coming out of those periods and what I focus on. Like that's sort of how I'm informing that in some ways.
Okay. So my main opinion is whatever you're doing, there's something you value about it. There's something about it that looks good to you that you have not refuted.
Um, I'm. I feel like we might be miscommunicating. Can you give me an example of like
Well, you said
yeah,
you're
what
not doing the stuff you value, so that means you're doing something else that you value less, right?
uh yeah.
Right, but I'm saying that that's something else, there's some reason that you value it.
Okay,
So
so
if you
oh yeah.
think you should be reading books, but you are always going to social events, then that is a sign that you actually value the social events a lot. There are reasons that you like them. So to deal with this problem, what you should not do is try to force yourself to read more, um, try to cut down on social events by willpower, and
Mm,
otherwise assume that you already know the answer about what activities you should do. Don't assume you should be reading more than you're currently reading and doing social events less. You don't know that yet. What you know is that you have conflicting ideas. You have a theory about why you should be reading more. And you also have a not yet understood theory about why you should be doing all these social events.
yep, yep. I think
So
I
more analysis is required to try to figure out what's going on. What you need to analyze in greater detail both the upsides and the downsides of both the social events and the readings, the pros and cons of both sides of the conflict.
okay, so if we take like my particular example is typically um like I'll avoid doing everything sort of thing, as in like I won't look at my phone or you know, whatever. Um, but the thing that I'm doing is, uh, so I feel like it's a bit different, but I'm not sure, from the social events example. So typically I'll like binge some video game during this period. Um, so like that was like what I did most of the weekend, for example. Um,
Right.
and sort of had these, I was like, oh, I'll stop at this point and then go do blah or whatever else, and I just don't end up doing it. And then I end up, the final step is usually, oh, I'll wake up early the next morning, and do a bunch of stuff that I intended to do over the weekend, and then I don't do that either. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Video
uh,
games to me sound like a drop-in example for social events. Like you can just replace one with the other and it's the same example.
um, yeah, so the video game itself seems to be somewhat arbitrary. Um, I mean, actually, no, it's not completely, but I don't like generally enjoy playing them, sort of thing. Like sometimes I do, but I mean, over the last month, for example, prior to this weekend, I think I had, like maybe 6 or 12 hours total in video games, like at best.
Okay.
Um,
Did you enjoy it during the binge or no?
yeah,
Okay, so you're saying that you don't enjoy it all the time, but then at certain times you want to play and enjoy it?
most of the time I find games most well, boring, for the lack of a better thing. Like I end up, um, yeah, I don't find them particularly like interesting. I'll like launch something and then play it for 15 minutes or something and decide that I don't want to anymore.
Yeah,
That's my
there's a
like, yeah.
variety of things that could be related here. One is cycles of burnout. So it's possible that you enjoy video games more when you're tired and it's harder to do other things,
Mm,
and they give you a
that's,
break. They consume less mental energy, so then you get rested.
yep.
Another possibility is that you sometimes find video games you like more, and then you binge because you found a good one that you're actually enjoying. But
Um,
you have a shortage of video games that you actually like, but then sometimes you find one. That can explain that kind of pattern.
there's definitely some types of games that I end up liking more, but like I mean, PvE World of Warcraft is one of the examples of like a thing that I've used in this period. Um, Fallout 4 or Skyrim, stuff like that. Like often there's not really a multiplayer aspect, or not a strong one at least. Um, so
Hmm.
anyway, that's just a side note on that. But yeah, often I'll go back to games that I've like played before, or
That's
stuff like that.
common. Um, some of the reasons for replaying games are one, it's easier. You don't have to learn a new rule system and set of controls and so on. Another one is you liked it for reasons in the first place. Those reasons still apply. Another reason is that you've learned new things, you're older and wiser, and now you can bring that new perspective to the game and do better than last time potentially. Like you wanna try again and see if you can outdo your previous gameplay skills.
Yeah. Um, there is definitely like one thing that is common between these games I end up choosing is like reward cycles. Um, so like Pokemon games are another one that I've used in this period, which have pretty standard reward cycles. I feel like,
Yeah,
along with questing based stuff. And the tired thing is definitely, um, like I
yeah.
often deliberately tire myself out during these periods.
Reward cycles are a sign that you like something about them, but often it's something bad or questionable in some way. So there's often some kind of misconception there when reward cycles appeal to someone.
Yep.
Common
Yeah.
misconceptions for reward cycles are deferring to authority. So there's the people who made the game and sort of seeing them as the authority, like the teacher who says what your goals are and whether you succeeded. A lot of people are not used to setting their own goals enough, so the game gives you goals.
Yep.
The game, they often give like shiny things like collectibles or like they have a character dance every time you level up or something. So there's, you know, the little glitz and glamour and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people are not confident in setting their own goals, but it's nice to compete against other people at the same goals, to be on the same page, doing the same activity, so you can actually make comparisons. If everyone sets their own arbitrary goals, then you're like all playing a different game and you can't talk strategy and you can't like learn from each other. So if you use the standard goals from the developer, it gets everyone on the same page. So there's actually a major upside there.
Yep. That makes sense. So
The games also, they try to be manipulative. One of the things they do is they make it so you can't get to certain parts of the game that you want until you level up enough or get enough gear or something.
yep, there's like a
So you have
gateway
to
on.
do X in order to get Y, and Y is the thing you actually want, and X is the only way to buy it. Or often the only ways to buy it are X or real money, your choice. That's how they make money nowadays often.
Yeah. Luckily, I don't binge on those sort of games.
Yeah, there are upsides to that compared to like a sandbox with God mode cheats. And the upside is you got more of an objective reality to interact with. You got more of a consistent world that makes sense conceptually instead of everything being kind of arbitrary and solipsistic.
Yeah, I'm thinking of there, like I have had a Minecraft binge before, and but even with that, there's a lot of consistency to the world, even though, you can choose what you build, for example, but um, well, actually, most of the time you don't. Most of the stuff you build is like mines and things, um, which is sort of indirectly set through the game's parameters and world design and stuff like that. Um, and that is synchronized between players. Like, um, you'll Google
Yeah,
for various mine layouts or stuff like that, even though people are making different castles.
yeah, the castle part is kind of arbitrary, just art. But there's also the standard gameplay with the zombies or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
but like if you imagine a game where you just had infinite cheat codes and God mode and whatever,
it's
um,
boring.
yeah, well, so you don't have to use it though, but people are bad at playing God and deciding how much to use it. They're bad at deciding how much to skip ahead and how powerful to make their character and so on. So having objective stuff where you have to get to a certain power level to do this dungeon or whatever, often works better for people than making their own decisions and they'll go there too early or too late or have too much stats or too little. Like having more of a guided progression often works better for people than having more control over their experience.
Oh, oh, sorry, I've got mail. I'll be back in a tick.
Okay.
Hey, sorry about that. Back.
Okay, I was just writing a couple notes.
Yep.
So regarding how to change, you never want to be fighting with yourself or suppressing things. You want to take the high road and be the neutral arbiter, the objective judge and scientist who is analyzing your options, gathering information, paying attention to what's going on, and when you want to make a change, you you have to try it out and test things and see it for yourself, not just in an abstract way, but also in a practical way. Like if you think parties are boring and you should quit parties because they're actually uninteresting, then you need to actually have the experience of getting bored at the party without faking it and forcing yourself. And if you can't do that, if you're actually having fun, then you need to more clearly analyze what's wrong with parties or change your mind and realize parties aren't so bad or something. But you don't know enough to conclude that parties are actually just totally empty of intellectual substance or any worthwhile values until you can actually like feel that way and see it that way in real time at the party. That's when you actually understand it enough, not just abstractly, but also how it applies to real situations.
Yeah. So the first time I heard that idea, I think was I think you've mentioned the book before as well, Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking,
Yes.
in regards to habits. Um, and yeah, and the idea of don't like if you're using willpower, then that's a problem because you're like actively going against your own goals, essentially, your implicit goals at the very least, um, or desires or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, convince yourself that this thing is not good first, honestly, um, as in honestly convince yourself, and then you just won't want to do it anymore. So there's nothing to force yourself to do. Um,
Yeah. Persuasion doesn't take willpower because it seems best to you in a thorough, non-conflicted way if you actually deal with all the issues.
yeah. Um, so I guess so. The thing that I'm thinking about at the moment is, uh, so I can think about like I can address this on a behavioral level from the view of like habits or things like that, the social stuff, or going to parties, etc. Um, but then there's like if we were to say like that burnout was part of this, I mean you could sort of treat burnout as the whole problem, um, but uh, they seem like they're different levels of emergence, and I should we try and unify them type thing in like this particular case, or is this just another goal on like in I can't remember what you called them, but with a yes no goal chart type thing?
What are the two things specifically?
So if we so say the example was going to parties instead of reading books.
Okay.
Um, so there's dealing with that from the point of view of actually becoming bored at the party,
Uh-huh.
but then there's like say that you did this like particularly because you were burnt out. I mean, um like when you were burnt out, you went and I don't know, went on all weekend binges or something like that. Um, those things are sort of like two different problems in the sense that you can deal
Yes.
with it from, yeah,
Yeah, I think those are different problems. You're doing parties for different reasons. One is because you like them in general, and one is because you're tired and you like them when you're tired. You find that they fit your tired state because they're relatively easy, etc. So there's different motivations there.
yeah. Um, so in terms of like going about um like these ideas that you've put down just on the page there,
Yeah,
I guess we've just got to consider that there's, or one needs to consider that there's like multiple reasons in there, and so and we can
yeah.
address them individually, but no, or was it? Yep.
Yes. Yeah, I would say
Okay.
yes.
Um, yeah. So I guess part of that is just not expecting the problem necessarily goes away when you deal with one of the things you consider to be a problem.
Yes,
Um,
that's important. You can fix one and then check and then find the next one, and it
yeah,
is easier to find a new problem after you solve one. Like it's
yeah,
easier to find the first problem than the second problem because it's more complicated if there's multiple factors. So if you only find one problem and then you solve it, now it's easier to find a new one.
yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, and I agree with this in terms of uh, like Goldrat's philosophy and stuff like that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, I guess luckily I mean, in my case, I don't do this all the time. Um, when I think about not doing it though, particularly in these periods. So most of the time, I have no problem with like not playing games, in that I choose not to most of the time. But then in these periods, I feel like there's a really strong resistance to not do that. Um,
Oh yeah. So another thing is that you can miss games. Like you haven't played them for a while, so you start to miss them more and more over time because they're doing something for you that you like, and then the longer you go without them, the more you like regret not playing and want to do it again.
yeah, yeah, I can sort of see that.
Yeah, it's like the longer I don't have sushi, the more I want sushi.
Yeah, sort of like maybe you don't think about it most of the time, but then when someone brings up sushi, you'll yeah want to do it much more than usual.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, okay. So
Games have good things about them. There are also common bad ways people do them. It's a bit like TV, where you can be more of like an active watcher who thinks while you're watching, or you can passively watch the TV and not think critically about what you're seeing. Similarly, you can be learning things while playing games and thinking strategically, and or you can play in like a bit of a brain dead autopilot way and get frustrated when you don't win.
yeah, this maybe that's one of the reasons I've got this bias towards like for these purposes, single player games or like PvE type stuff, because basically there's no like it's hard to lose. You die occasionally challenge wise, like just coming up against something, but you then just respawn and do it again, or reload a save and do it again. Um, yeah, so there's
Yeah,
no. It's hard to get frustrated by, except with like difficulty, as in like trying to play the recent Doom games on too high a difficulty. Um, you know, most people just will never get anywhere. Um, as opposed to RPGs and stuff where there's a bit more room to move. Um, yeah. So,
so a
all
few of the
right. So let's.
common cases in our society. With social stuff, people there are arguments that various social things are bad, but they're not deep or thorough enough. And this is why people end up really conflicted, is because the analysis of what's wrong with social or what is social or how social works, like parties, but various other things too, is very incomplete and inadequate. So the arguments, the criticisms are not good enough to become at peace and reject it and see through it and lose interest in it and so on. So people
Mm.
often get stuck because there's like rationalist subcultures say that some of those things are bad, but they don't actually have the arguments to back it up all the way. They have partial arguments that leave people conflicted.
Is there a slippery slope type thing that can happen in terms of, so say, I enjoy, I don't know, going to have a beer with colleagues after work, but and even though I don't particularly see myself like, staying out all night and getting really drunk and having a hangover the next day, like that often happens because, and my, theory about this, say, is that you just get looser when you drink more, and so I'm more ready to do this like later on, but when I wouldn't agree to it like up front. Is there, does that, like, is it possible for a person to honestly not like the last part when doing that because of like
I
alcohol
I think
changing things, or does that?
primarily that alcohol, people do what they already wanted to do. It just gives them an excuse.
Yeah.
I think that there's things you like about it, and there's reasons. They're not necessarily like positive values. They can be things like
Mm,
not wanting to stand up to your friends who are pressuring you to do it, for example. That's a reason people will do something, and it's not to gain a positive value, it's to avoid something bad happening.
yeah. I sort of wonder, like, one of the ways that I've, um, or like staying at home a lot more in the last few months, I've quite enjoyed not being as social, um, particularly because stuff like alcohol consumption and things is, vastly reduced. Um, yeah, I sort of wonder how many people are feeling that now, in the sense that like they don't have to have an excuse not to stand up to their friends, for example. Um,
Yeah, I think some
or,
are. Most people are just like missing their friends, but
mm,
some people are having a decent time.
but yeah. So,
So on the flip side, so that was about the criticism of the allegedly bad things is not thorough enough, is a very common issue. The flip
yeah,
side is that the things people think are good are often not as good as they think. There's something going wrong there. So, for example, they think reading is good. And reading certainly can be good, but you can also read unproductively. It's possible to not get much value out of reading. So, a lot of the times when people are not reading as much as they think they should, it's because when they do read, they don't get much value out of it. They're actually not reading with the correct methods, like not enough critical thinking or whatever.
yeah,
So there's different types of reading, and their type of reading is not actually all that good, and that's why they're resisting it or conflicted or whatever. And so they need to figure out how to read better. And if hypothetically they were much better at learning from reading, then they would find that they spent more time on it voluntarily already. Like that's pretty common that if it was actually being more effective, they would do it more.
yeah. Um, yeah, yeah. No, these two make things make sense. As in the stuff we want to reduce behaviors in, we're not convinced we should be, or at least not to that scale. And the stuff that we want to increase the behaviors, uh, we don't understand why they're actually good enough yet. There might be other problems, etc., that we're not dealing with.
Yeah. People often have pretty wild misconceptions about what intellectuals do and what their life is like. Like they have like a picture of a rational person, and it's not realistic. It doesn't fit actual people very well, and they wouldn't actually like it. And they think they're supposed to force themselves to do that kind of mold, and it causes a lot of trouble. Like asceticism is a common part of that stereotype, like just eating
Asceticism.
plain rice.
Oh, okay, yep.
Ascetic is like not caring about material values and luxuries and
Sort of the monk-like sort of thing people
yeah,
like.
yeah.
Yeah,
And even there it said self-discipline. So it's very different if you like are forcing discipline on yourself versus you're like intuitively, naturally autopiloting a certain way.
yeah. So
Like
funny. I mean,
there's some people who
sorry.
run on a regular basis, and it takes a lot of discipline to stay on their schedule and keep doing it. There's other people who just they actually like running, and it doesn't take discipline for them to keep doing it. It's just part of their life, one of their hobbies.
Yep.
And so for good intellectuals, it's usually more like that. It's like actually one of their hobbies. They don't need discipline in order to spend time thinking and reading.
Yeah, that's definitely like, I mean, when I think about the times where I need discipline, um, or, where I would be showing a lack of discipline, I guess is maybe the other way to put it. Um, like work is an easy example in that, well, besides some of it, when like doing startup stuff and things, well, not all of that, but like typical work is, yeah, um, usually anyway, yeah, it's one of those things where I think about that. Whereas like reading BOI, for example, was not anything that I needed to be disciplined about. I was like waiting for the next opportunity to keep reading it type thing. So I get what you mean. I think people generally would intuitively get that, um, at least about some things.
Yeah, when I played chess as a kid, I liked it. I was actively trying to get more chess. I didn't take discipline to play, but then most of the kids there were pressured by their parents and had to keep being nagged just like doing their homework.
Yep. Um, Sort of as an aside, it sort of feels like that's probably not a bad thing to keep in mind while parenting. Um,
That if you have to nag your kid, then he doesn't actually want to do it. There's something wrong. He's not just that forgetful.
um, yeah, not just that, but like the deeper sort of um, just about like the role of, well, discipline versus I don't know what you sort of say, like the default thing or like what people want to do anyway, their desires. Um, and but yeah, but if discipline is coming up, then you probably got to have a good reason for it, as opposed to, you know, the way that most kids are exposed to the idea of discipline, which is like you have to go to your music practice now or whatever else. I guess school is a lot like that. It's a hard anyway. That's a big problem. We'll get off topic. Um, so I
Yeah,
was,
so
oh
broad
yep,
categories would be you might like things about the stuff you're doing instead of FI. You might you might have criticisms of them that are not thorough enough, and your FI work might not be productive enough. You might not be doing it in the best ways, or you might have like doubts or objections about what you're doing that needs to be addressed. Like you might doubt that it will really lead to a big difference, like that it'll have, practical effects in the end instead of just being clever and interesting. That's a common type of doubt people have.
yeah. Um, in terms of FI particularly, I haven't uh thought about this from like this angle. If I have, definitely not recently. Um, one thing I was thinking about was um like the idea of, so I guess in the background, like a parallel chain of thoughts is like um the question sort of occurred to me like, when is it good to take breaks from things? Um, because on the one hand, you know, find it hard to sort of think that never take a break is the right answer. Um, Particularly because we need periods of error correction. Like I'm taking a break from the rest of my life, sort of to focus on a lot of this stuff at the moment. Um, uh, or I guess that's one way to look at the word break. Um, so there's sort of questions about like when to take breaks. Um, this is related to like one of my sort of ideas is uh, like getting overwhelmed and this being a reaction to it. Like particularly one thing that sort of gets me is like when I do these things, maybe it's because of uh like a bunch of things have just got bundled up in like the way that I've learnt to deal with various problems. So I deal with like a class of problems the same way or something like that. Um, but like I reject everything um from normal life type thing besides, physical needs. Um,
Yeah,
Sleep may be accepted. Um,
that kind of thing's pretty common because people find that they get drawn into stuff and they get onto autopilot and go back to old habits. So they have to get like a lot of distance and go kind of cold turkey, or they're not really able to tone things down very well.
yeah. One So that sort of makes sense. Like I did at the beginning of starting this, I did make an effort to like cut down a lot of the stuff that I was doing in the background for other things because it was just going to take away too much time and things like that. Um, I have noticed my like I've kept adding stuff to my like Trello to-do list type things. I don't often update it, but uh, like I mean, this was meant to be like a today's goal. It's just now turned into a regular backlog. And then this planned, oh, some of this is actually meant to be done. Oh, what's on? Okay, I think there's an issue with some stuff where done stuff ends up here. Anyway, in the planned this week column, because like the choice, chapter 3 is obviously done. Um,
Yeah, having some queue is okay so that you have options and flexibility. You can pick what do you want to work on today, not just have like one thing and it has to be this. You don't want them to get too huge, but it is okay to take things out, to put things in and take them out, like easy come, easy go.
yeah, I have done that to an extent. Like there's some things I move out, but like even, you know, more than half of this, um, more than half of this is just stuff that I've like from either our tutorials or related to FI things. Um, I mean, I've got yeah, like 2 or 3 things in here from outside that. Um, Really, it's like there's a lot of stuff that I'm also not recording now as well, in terms of like I should put the choice chapters 7 up down here, but I haven't. Um, yeah, so I guess like so like this list is not that this is like particularly important in and of itself, but it's like a symptom or like the turner of this list as a measurement, I think might be significant. Um, I'm not, sure exactly how much or things like that, but um, it feels like it's at least a data point that matters, or can matter.
Yeah.
Um,
So one of the common things is people overestimate how quickly they should be able to do things and how much they should be able to get done. That's
yeah,
just very common in general across fields. A lot of that is sort of looking at best case scenarios instead of average case scenarios. And a lot of it is not taking into account being tired. They just look at raw time. And a lot of it is not taking into account transition time between activities and that kind of thing. Like if you only look at the activities themselves, like once you actually get started and you're already set up, then it's a shorter amount of time than the real time.
I did notice just on that note, uh, when I was so another like anyway symptom of the past few days, 3 or 4 days has been I think I haven't journaled in that time, or maybe the first day. Um, anyway, but one thing I noticed with the previous journaling was uh, I did not realize how much time I spent on overhead when I was trying to keep up with things. So just like, attending to email inbox type stuff, or like
Uh-huh.
buying groceries and things like that. And until I started recording it, I didn't, realize how much time I actually ended up spending on that. What's funny is a lot of it is, not even like I typically avoid packing my dishwasher, even though it's like 7 minutes for unpacking packing cycle type thing. Which is not a lot of overhead especially if you bundle it up with other stuff. Anyway, that was just a side thought.
Yeah, I often do the dishwasher while I'm microwaving something.
Yeah, I typically, well, I don't I've been thinking about fixing those stuff more and more lately, but they're not massive problems, so I haven't been focusing on it. Um, so I've sort of had this question banging around for a while. I'm not sure if we need to cover more stuff before answering it. Um, so like the idea of burnout has been a pretty common theme in me trying to figure out these periods, which have, shorter and longer periods. Sometimes it's just a one-off sort of thing, like a weekend, um, and other times it's much longer. The So say we've got, or I've got this theory about like burnout is responsible. Um, uh, how do I go about? I guess is verifying that important to start with? I guess how do we verify it without trying to solve it? Um,
Right. So burnout is reasonably testable because you can take a few days of break, get plenty of sleep, and then see if you feel better and if you actually want to do it. Because sometimes people, then they have a new excuse,
mm,
but sometimes they don't. Sometimes after the break, they'll do it for a little while and then they stop again. And if it is actually a burnout problem, you ought to be able to manage your life in a stable way where you're not hitting burnout periods. So you could try, 2 hours of high focus per day, and you could go for a month and you could see if you burn out or not. And that would hopefully be an amount that is okay. And then if that worked, you could increase it a bit and you could, uh, keep testing different like schedules and aggressiveness of what you do and see if is it possible to have one that's stable where you're not hitting any of these burnout cycles if they are burnout cycles. And on the other hand, yeah, how you can try to find out where the limit is. So if you go with something that's like overly conservative, it should actually work if your problem is burnout. You do have to be
yeah,
careful at the beginning because sometimes people have like long-term burnout where it takes a while to recover. So you need to get a decent sense of like when you're recovered from whatever you're doing previously and how long that's going to take because depending on what you've done, it could be like a month instead of a couple days.
yeah. Um, I did like, so I feel like that's a pretty reasonable. I had like I don't know 6 or 8 weeks or something like that from mid-March through, I think. Anyway, there was a period where the end of that I started like being productive again. Um, but but that period was um, like Age of Empires 2 I ended up getting into. So that's actually I don't always go for single player games. I ended up playing like 80 ranked games or something in a month um, on that. Um, and actually practicing a lot of like, or not a lot, but like some learning techniques and things, which is curious because that was at the beginning of the period. Anyway, so I feel like in terms of any bigger, longer cycles things, I've had a reasonable period of no uh, pressure pretty recently. So I kind of I
Yeah. My general impression, I didn't really think you had like long-term burnout like some people get that's really bad. So
Yeah, no, I've always had flexible type stuff, so I think I tend to um yeah, end up taking a break before like anything super long or whatever else. Like I've heard some people being affected by. But yeah,
Yeah. So if the problem really is burnout, it shouldn't be super hard to find a stable, ongoing process or schedule or whatever that works. Um, you just err on the low side and tune it up gradually if things are working.
yeah. Um,
Um, what people can do, they overestimate, by the way. I don't know if you've
uh,
seen me
yeah,
talk about this before, but a variety of smart people, including Jordan Peterson, have said that the typical person can only do serious concentration for around 3 hours a day.
yeah. So yeah, I've heard four usually is one of the numbers, but that's ballpark the same. That's fine. Um,
Yeah,
I yeah, I mean I don't know. So I guess the first thing is I agree in terms of overestimation. Um, I mean I do this, and I know I do this just because I've estimated projects and stuff, and they end up being longer. Um, so there's just that side of things. I don't have a yeah problem buying that. Um, I think recently I've sort of become more aware of the variety and degree of overestimation that I've made. Um, uh,
yeah. This is part of the reason it's important to have a variety of activities, including easier ones. Um, you want to have activities that use different resources, so you can not always be putting pressure on the same resource or bottleneck. Right? So if concentration is a bottleneck, then you want to be able to use more of some of your other workstations and find ways to get value out of them.
yeah,
I find concentration has different types. So, for example, reading with text visually and reading by listening to audio only partially overlap. Like to some extent, they share a resource where both make you tired, but to some extent, they're using different resources. So if I do half and half, it's easier than all of one.
yeah, yeah. Um, I roughly agree with that. I find it harder actually. Listening is like easier to do passively, but then to closely listen, I find a lot harder than closely reading. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
um,
common, partly because listening is the words just keep coming at you,
you can't.
whereas
Yeah.
reading is more self-paced, so it's easier to analyze as you go.
Um, there was a question that I had. I think about the role that other things play, like uh, so like the sort of like not living up to your own expectations type things. I didn't hold on to the question well enough, so it's sort of a bit foggy now.
Okay, well, another example is mental and physical energy. Um, they both contribute to some generic tiredness. They're also fairly different. You can do one or the other. You can do some of both. Going for a run like leaves you able to read a book or vice versa.
Um, Balance between the two. So one thing I notice is so sometimes I'll have like an evening. I might be like you know sort of run out of mental juice earlier, but then I'll like have this period later on where like I feel like I've got a lot more mental energy, but I'm physically not that energetic because it's like 11 p.m. Um, yeah, emotional drain and stress. So that was the question that I wanted to ask about before. Um,
Okay.
uh, but yeah, so with the mental physical stuff still, um, is trying to balance them really important? Like if I have that thing,
It's not super important, but it's an opportunity. Like if you're running out of one of them and you have spare of the other, then you could look for, are there productive activities that use the other one? If I did those right now, that would be efficient.
yeah, okay. Um, That makes sense.
You can think of
Um,
it to some loose approximation as every day you get 100 units of a dozen different currencies to spend, and they refresh every time you sleep.
yep, yep, yep.
And
A
then when you
friend,
buy stuff, it doesn't just cost one type of currency, it's like it'll cost two of everything plus 10 of physical.
yep, it's like a basket, yep, of different balances and different.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, no. So there's a friend mentioned the spoons analogy, I think it is, which I think is particularly to do with like mental emotional sort of energy, is what the author sort of thing. This is like a 15 years ago type thing. Someone wrote about it. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. It's like a pop
haven't heard.
sort of thing. Um, anyway, yeah. So there's this like a much more simplified version of the idea. Um, God. Um, okay, yeah. Spoon theory is apparently what it's called. Um, but explain the reduced amount of mental and physical energy available for activities of living and productive tasks. And then, particularly in the author was particularly caring about disability and chronic illness. But
Okay, so spoon
uh,
is just one currency unit.
yeah. Well, I think the author treats all currency units as spoons. They sort of wrap it up.
Yeah,
Which I guess if you
there's
had
one
like
currency and a spoon is a unit.
um yeah, particularly in the case for people with like disability or chronic illness, I can imagine like currency heavily weighted in like one particular aspect. Um, but once you get out into yeah, as you become more capable in general, I imagine that those currencies shift and change.
Okay, I'm
Um,
unclear on why they picked spoons, but the concept seems fine. It's just currency measuring expenditures of energy.
I don't think that there was any particular thing. Um, there we go. Someone took spoons from a nearby table to use as video visual aids, and she just kept it.
Yeah, okay.
So, um, yeah. So, I don't have a good sense for what my well. I mean, I
Limits
think I
are
have
in
more.
different categories.
Even to say that I have more of X than I was going to say I have more mental and physical energy, but that doesn't mean anything because they're different units.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
what I mean by that, I guess, is that when looking at myself like in the distribution of all people, then I think
Yes.
I'm at the high end mentally and at the low end physically.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I was
'Cause-
gonna say, is if you compare to a societal average,
yeah.
then you get a way to compare.
Um, yeah. Okay. Um, so this is, I mean, yeah, I definitely have been noticing that I'm, uh, so like with coding stuff, a lot more of it I can do on autopilot. Like there's a lot of less interesting things, um, like, just plumbing as such as it's often called, that's not direct
Yeah.
problem solving. Um, anyway, I think that's like I've noticed that like trying to do FI stuff is a lot more like um, I get tired more easily, which is well,
Yeah,
it's
so
new.
how quickly you get tired has a lot to do with how hard it is, which has a lot to do with the quality and practice level of your prerequisites and underlying skills or intellectual tools. So the more you work on your foundation, the easier it gets. Like when you first did arithmetic, it was hard and took focus. But now you can do arithmetic really easily, very cheap on resources. And that makes it easier to do algebra. The easier arithmetic gets, then the less tiring it is to do algebra because arithmetic is a component that you use.
Yep. Yeah. Um,
FI has a lot of skills that are different than coding. It has some like FI specific things like my philosophy stuff, but it also just has generic skills that are used all throughout society that are just different than the coding ones, like writing and communication type stuff, dealing with people are different than coding.
yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Um, mm,
and it involves a sort of uncertainty in a way compared to coding. Coding's very exact and rigorous, and it compiles or it doesn't. And the goals are often very clear, like what should this function do is really clearly defined, um, which is what I sort of recommend you do with philosophy and yes/no philosophy is having clearer goals. But you know, the typical ways people in our society approach this kind of stuff is you have like these open, unresolved issues, like there's debates between ideas, and you gradually make progress on the debates, and they remain open issues without clear answers, and you have to live with that ongoing doubt and not fully knowing the answer in a way that programmers aren't used to.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just trying to roll everything up in my head to sort of figure out where to go next. So I guess in terms of like a question like what should I do now, sort of thing, or what should I do tomorrow, is like if you're, you know, at this sort of period or at this sort of point where you think there's like a problem or whatever else, we can't really say what our next action should be without an explanation of what's going on and how we're going to actually try and fix it, right? As in, yeah, we can't sort of answer any questions about it without that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, that's how I was typing.
Oh no, that's all right. I didn't hear anything, so that's fine. Oh, you mean just with the typing? Yeah, no, that's cool.
Well, I thought you were
Um,
responding to me, so it disrupted what you were saying.
oh no, no. No, you might be able to tell when I'm like looking above the camera. I'm typically looking out the window or like off into the distance or things so it's not, yeah, nothing on screen is distracting. Um,
Okay, what you said worked as a response to what I typed, so I was confused.
oh, okay, that's just chance. Um, yeah, okay. So when measuring something like word count or things, and that's uh sort of to gauge, like, our theory about that would be like as word count or things increase, then we should either be nearing or maybe we'd see a drop off beforehand, but we'd sort of see some sort of rise before burnout or a rapid drop at least. I don't know. I'm not even sure if we'd see a rise because you could be doing something consistently and just end up getting burnt out still, and then not do it for a month and then do something
Yeah,
consistently for 6 months again. Um,
yeah, okay. So the
but
first thing is you need some way to sort of judge how much did I do today. That way you can compare and try to, you need some way of measuring how much you're doing so you can decide this much seems to be okay, I can do this long term. So having some poor proxies for that is a lot better than nothing. You know, keep in mind that they're not exact proxies for how much mental effort you spent, but you still want to be measuring some things that you can try to figure out if you control certain proxies, do you end up getting an acceptable result?
yeah,
Possibly with a bit of manual fudging when you make a judgment call to override it.
so yeah, something like word count, you could keep your word count up at the expense of quality, as an easy example, and that doesn't, it doesn't indicate constant effort, but because you can sort of realize that, you can fudge those numbers to actually see what's going on as such. Um,
Yeah. So then, as you increase these things, um, if you pay attention, you can notice early warning signs well in advance of burnout. So you can find that it's harder, you're losing focus more frequently, you just don't feel like it. Things like those can be signs of it's too much, especially when they're generic. So one of the tests you can do is you can try like 5 different intellectual activities uh, and that are diverse. And if it's evasion, there's a good chance that the evasion will not apply to all of them, hopefully. Like, don't keep reusing the same ones you avoid, but
sorry, what's evasion in this case? Like something that were a behavior
If
we're
you're
noticing?
avoiding working on certain issues because you're stuck on those issues,
Okay, yeah.
then this should not apply to all the issues. Whereas if the issue is that you're tired, it should apply in a more generic, universal way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
A lot of evasion stuff, by the way, is it's subtle in a particular way where you don't have negative feelings, you're just like you give in to your tiredness on certain things you're stuck on. But then if you do something else that you're not stuck on, you get a burst of energy. You experience it as being more excited or motivated or something. Um,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
there's
sorry.
variance to the upside instead of to the downside.
Yeah, okay. So, um, I d- so just yeah, reflecting on those ideas. I feel like I can sort of put my memories on particular things that are far more about uh the evasion or avoidance of particular things, either because I'm stuck or I guess if something is hard to do or not fun to do or whatever else, that sort of indicates being stuck or having a problem in some way anyway. It might not, it's not typically there's this one, I don't know how to build a bridge, but I need to build a bridge. There can be other more subtle things, but they're all sort of pointing to the same, um, or the fact that a problem exists. Um, I mean, procrastination is obviously the most common way people deal with that. Um, and this I feel like is at least a little bit different, um, in that I can put my finger on particular times in the past where I do procrastination, not this thing that I wrote about in my little thing. So even though I've called it evasion periods, maybe I sort of call it that because I'm avoiding everything, but that's
Oh, and another big thing to look at to see if it's evasion.
mhm.
After you take a break, do you go back to the same thing or do you go back to something different? Because what a lot of people do, as a classic sign of evasion, is they ask a certain question on a forum and they have that discussion. Then they leave for a week. Then they come back. Then they bring up a different topic. Whereas if you just take a break and then you go back to the same topic, that is an indication that you were not actually stuck on that topic. The problem wasn't the topic.
Yeah, okay. Um, yeah. Or maybe there was like a local problem or something that was too much at the time, but that's not the main problem of uh, that was the cause of the behavior, as opposed to like evasion as a more generic problem. The cause of the behavior, sorry, the cause of the behavior is a problem, and the ultimate goal is to avoid that problem forever. Like posting to a forum example, like, you have a problem with that topic. Um, and so goal is maybe too directed of a word type thing, as in people
Yeah,
can
yeah.
obviously have a lot of different stuff going on in their mind.
The
But yeah,
revealed preference.
yeah, the revealed preference is never to deal with that post or whatever else that happens again. Um, whereas like burnout, uh, the revealed preference is going back to a thing, um, in that you know that your goals or that that is aligned with your goals or values or whatever else. You've got a preference for it, but there's specific times where this other thing has a higher preference in terms of your local behavior. Um, yeah, like with burnout rest. Um, yeah. Okay. No, that's a lot of makes a lot of sense. It's one of those things that I've never heard. I've heard a lot of people talk about procrastination and stuff, but I'm not sure I've ever heard that particular idea.
Okay, good. Should we look at your tree a bit?
Yeah, yep. Let's have a look at that.
Do you have a link?
No, I can post a screenshot in.
Oh, it all
Um,
fits. Okay, that's fine too.
uh, yeah, it sort of zooms okay, like the font size zooms with it. So, but I can also like render a copy. Where's Discord? Um, so I find that the preview in Discord is often like the lower res, but if you click open original,
Yeah, this looks
it
okay.
should,
Text is readable.
yeah.
Okay, evasion period. What's this little symbol right here?
Um, Oh, that's I don't quite know. That's the program doing something. I think it basically just means it's
Oh,
the root
okay.
of a tree. I'm not
Okay.
exactly sure.
Okay, so big problem. Overview, guesses at causes, behaviors.
So behaviors is I've listed other behaviors in there. That sort of was just hanging off the end, and I didn't have anywhere to put it. But overview and guesses causes for where I spent most of the time and energy. So I don't actually talk about the problem I realized in the problem thing. Just wanted someone general to put info.
Disappointed is a common notable issue. It's also related to having a self-image, either that you care about yourself or that you want to project to others, and trying to maintain that. So disappointment in self can be related to a clash or gap between uh, how you want to be seen or see yourself versus how you're currently seeing yourself or thinking you're being seen. So it can often be related to social status dynamics,
Yep.
where if you don't present that way, then you're going to lose status, and that is threatening. And it can also be from the clash between what our culture teaches us as reasonable expectations and what's actually true. Um, some stuff that our culture teaches you should be able to do or shouldn't be that hard or whatever is they are incorrect. It's actually harder than they say it is, especially given how good our schools are, etc.
Hmm.
So our culture teaches some unrealistic expectations about how smart and wise people are, how much capability and competence there is in the world. It teaches us that sort of the average level of competence in the world, or at least in, middle class places and well-run businesses and so on, is like is quite high. And I don't think that's true. So
Hmm.
everyone is sort of comparing themselves to the 97th percentile, and they think that's average-ish.
Hmm.
There's a great deal of incompetence in the world, all over the place, and that's actually just kind of normal. So if you can rise above it some, you should, to some extent, be happy instead of being disappointed that you're not living up to this unrealistic model that society presents. It's a little like how there's the model of the ideal feminine beauty that is presented by magazines, and it's totally fake bullshit. And it hurts a lot of people who are disappointed when they don't live up to it.
Yep. Sometimes for incredibly minor things. You can see from the outside. So yeah, there's so I'm not okay. Yep, sorry. Okay. Um
So, one of the things that helps there is to recalibrate your expectations about what you should be able to do, what's reasonable, etc. And you can just sort of generically lower them a bit. However, what's better than that is to try to come up with explanatory conceptual understandings about what your capabilities are, why, what it would take to improve them, what other people's capabilities actually are, what they can do or not do. Which, if you can understand, like behind the scenes, what they can actually do versus how they present themselves and see the difference, then you can compare yourselves to like the real other people instead of their facade, and that'll help
hmm.
you get a more realistic view of where you fit into the world, which is generally more flattering than the initial disappointed view.
Yeah. Um so one thing that is always a bit hard to put my finger on is when I think about like self-disappointment, like so sometimes it's easy in that, you just fail to do a thing. Um but sometimes it's hard in that you don't. I don't know. So maybe this is relevant to the stress slash like pressure or responsibility type things. Um, in that, well, I guess if you go through a period of self-doubt, it makes sense that you would like potentially overgeneralize that, or that if one, then one would potentially overgeneralize that. Um, yeah, like I often feel like for me at least, I end up so there's a few things sort of in parallel when things happen with like in multiple streams of one's life simultaneously, and then also stuff like the backlog sort of thing growing. Um, so I guess, oh yeah, my question before, the one that I forgot, is essentially, I think when you've got like pressure or stress or emotional overhead, um, how you should adjust in terms of how you spend your currency. Like if you're worrying about things later on at night, for example. So say someone was going through a divorce and they're, thinking about it a lot throughout the day. That's going to overspend their like critical thinking or creative thinking or emotional or however they're engaging with it, but it's going to overspend that like currency, or
Yeah,
or it can potentially overspend it. So if you have these like overheads, then dealing with those overheads is sort of crucially important because they're like a tax or well, they're like interest on a loan or something like that. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
right. And then on the flip side of that, you can increase your budget. Um, you can go to the gym and work out a lot and increase your physical energy budget. You can practice reading on a regular basis and you get more used to it, and you'll find your tolerance for it goes up a bit. Your budget goes up. So that also helps a lot. And there is a potential compound interest when you increase your budget, which lets you learn more per day, and then learning more per day lets you increase your budget faster.
yeah, um,
Although some types of budgets seem to have diminishing returns where it gets harder and harder to increase it.
yeah. I feel like they all do to some extent. Um, uh, as in they all sort of have like an S curve sort of shape, even if they keep going up afterwards. Um, like I was gonna say physical learning, but like learning physically, or rather, there's no physics-based limit on learning, and one person can continue to learn, even in isolation forever potentially. Um, Presumably not isolation from the world, but from society, for example. Um, but you're going to get diminishing returns once you start having to break new ground with everything that you're thinking about, as opposed to being able to play catch up by reading things that people who have already thought about it have written, etc. Um,
Yeah, that is a major slowdown, but that's like a constant factor slowdown, kind of.
yeah, okay,
Um,
sort of like just
I,
overhead on
I
each
don't think
idea as
it's
opposed to
so bad in the big picture. Like if we had immortality, it
yeah.
wouldn't this that type of slowdown wouldn't be so bad. But yeah, a constant overhead given very constant lifetimes, it does make a major difference.
Yep, yep. No, I agree with that. I
In
don't think it's
regards to diminishing returns in the budgets, even if there are diminishing returns on increasing your budget, what there isn't diminishing returns on, I think, is cheapening your activities, being able to do activities more efficiently. So, like, maybe your budget caps out at 20 of a certain currency, but you can fit more activities into that currency as you find more
um
and more efficient ways to do them.
so okay, so this is um like particularly the so I'm trying to think of a concrete example. There's stuff like, changing the order of things would be like in your morning routine. I don't know, you could brush your teeth at the same time as being in the shower, and you get more time out
Okay,
at the
so
end. But
a
that,
good example for a toy example is that you're doing something according to a misconception. So
yeah,
uh, you are reading a book, but you read every word 3 times for some reason, because
yeah,
you don't understand how to read, and you read them out of order and blah blah blah. Right? So you can fix those things, and then the activity gets a lot cheaper. And we have a lot of misconceptions that could be fixed. That is a very, very fertile ground for a very large amount of progress, is just fixing like misconceptions where we're just doing it in a bad way.
yeah, yeah. So that makes sense. Um, uh,
But then a
there,
different sort of approach is automation.
oh, sorry, that was, yeah, what I was going to bring up next was it makes a lot of sense in coding, but even like a new consumer device comes out that, makes cooking more efficient or things like that. So there's, uh, but that sort of thing, I mean, so it's things that we can passively do all the time. I agree there's sort of no limit in the sense that, like, there's the ways that technology has, like, influenced us over the past few centuries. Everyone,
Uh,
or not
yeah.
everyone,
So there are
the predictions for when
technological
it'll end were
solutions like
is always wrong.
brain augmentation, or hooking up books to us in a more efficient input format, like so it doesn't have to go through our eyes or our ears, just hook them up directly. Then we'd be able to read faster. So there's stuff like that. But there is also some other types of things you can do. So a lot of it's goal related. So like the goal when you read a book is not really to read all the words. The goal is to find the important knowledge in the book and learn it, something like that, generally. Um, so you can get massive speed ups by not reading most of the book. You can use outlines and spark notes and stuff. You can use powerful skimming techniques and targeted search. And that kind of thing can give huge speed ups with little downside if you are doing it in a skillful enough way. It's partly reliant on what resources exist. So, like, as society improves, there will be better resources to enable it. But it's also partly just your own individual skill. Um, that's a bit of a personal example. Um,
Yep,
for
but I think it makes
example,
sense.
I skimmed a 800-page fantasy book in under 2 hours, and my friend was very annoyed because he had recommended it to me and lent it to me, and so he thought I like didn't respect the book. But then we discussed it, and I had understood every main scene and reminded him of one he'd forgotten about.
Yeah, okay. Um, which if your goal is to have a good discussion or to understand the plot or things like that, it works perfectly well. Um,
Yeah, I didn't like the book that much, so I didn't want to slow read it. Like, I didn't care about all the little details.
yeah, or particularly if the little detail or there's like use of language that's annoying, then it makes, yeah, plenty of sense. Um, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so there's stuff like that on top of reading the words faster. There's many different techniques where you actually solve your problems that you care about faster and more efficiently
Yeah.
with less resource use. So there's many, many opportunities to find things like that in different fields that make things better.
Um, does creating new methods of doing the same activity come under like misconceptions?
I mean, you could kind of categorize it either way, like anything where you're not doing it in the ideal way, there's sort of a misconception. So
Yeah,
there's a bit of a blurry line between I was doing it wrong versus I found a new way to do it better.
yeah. I think it probably makes more sense to distinguish the two. In like Deutsch uses misconception in BOI, obviously. Well, I think more towards the end he sort of talks about we should, probably label more things this. Um, but yeah, coming up with a new way, I feel like is a bit different to correcting a misconception. Like if you realized that you could just read every word once instead of 3. I mean, I guess you have come up with a new way. In that, how do you correct a misconception without learning or creating knowledge in some form?
Yeah, so another type of automation, a good example is spellcheck, or previously typewriters and then word processors. These helped writers write faster and more easily, saved on their budget. We're getting better grammar tools now instead of only checking spelling. So those help. And then we have GPT-3 now. I don't know if you've seen any of this stuff.
So the Slate Star Codex guy wrote about it occasionally, but it's literary synthesis using like neural nets and stuff. That's what I took away from a brief glance.
Yes. So a way to write stuff is to have GPT-3 generate the article for you and then edit it. And this can be a huge time save compared to writing it yourself.
That is a really funny idea. Particularly one thing that occurs to me is in terms of plagiarization tools that they use at university. If you can just re-roll the generate function and it spits out different stuff every time, that might be an issue. Yeah, so uh, I need to look into that later as to whether or how far people have taken that. Sorry, not written. I have read some stories that were
Yeah,
written by
people have been
GPT-3.
tweeting examples recently, and some of the text it generates seems pretty decent. It's pretty good at doing domains. Like you can give it a prompt of like legalese, and then it can generate like lawyer speak, for example.
Yeah. I think there was an article, or there was an example posted to the Slate Star Codex subreddit the other day that like just the one time that I went to look at it. Um, anyway, I think it was Terry Pratchett was one of the synthesized authors, and the story was like sort of a bit weird, but at the same time, it's the type of thing where if you took that into like if you put that in a book of old ancient poems or whatever else or something like that, people could easily study it, sort of thing. Which is funny to consider them doing that. But but yeah, no, it's quite convincing and um okay.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's
so it's a poor substitute for some types of writing, but there's a lot of writing where the quality standard is not actually key, where you could have mediocre writing and edit it to be good enough.
yeah. Or particularly if I imagine if people have written a lot of that sort of stuff before. So like there's a lot of similar or very similar like 300 to 500 word blog posts type thing.
Yeah,
I imagine you could generate some pretty convincing ones of those. Um, so is
yeah. There's
the
also using your budget more efficiently, having a better understanding of what your max is so you can spend all of it, but also how much actually regenerates from sleep because all is an approximation. Um, so understanding, yeah, how it regenerates from sleep. And then also there's rest activities during the day. You can take a nap, you can watch a TV show and not think about it that much, like chill. You can listen to music, you can, take a shower. Different things have different amounts of regeneration of different currencies.
Let's go for a walk. I used to juggle actually when I'd like end up getting stuck on a problem is go juggle for 10, 15 minutes. Um,
Right. And yeah, juggling and walking only work if you have a surplus of physical budget, which is a reasonably common situation for people doing intellectual stuff. So it's
yeah,
taking advantage of other currencies being available.
yep. Um, is well, I guess there's always going to be some level of overheads, and not all overheads are able to be dealt with promptly. But
Yep.
are overheads the priority for like if you're um so one of the things that I have been increasingly feeling the pressure of is some of the stuff that I've like put off to spend more time on this. Um, and I think this sort of conflicts a little bit with uh my existing ideas about what I should be spending time on. Um, and although I think my ideas about what I should be spending time on are getting better, there's like that itself is still an improvement. Like I guess this has to be, there's sort of got to be a sort of like lockstep improvement in both to some degree. Um,
Yeah, okay. So, quick comment. The currency
Mhm.
budget idea is an approximation. It's a decent metaphor, but it's not perfect. So, if you de-approximated it, if you found out how it really works in more detail, you would get some more opportunities there to improve things, be more efficient, etc.
Yep.
And then about overhead, you the short answer is you look at what's societally normal, and if you have significant overheads that are not standard, then getting rid of those is a high priority because it's very achievable. However, a lot of inefficiency comes from failure, irrationality, thinking poorly, getting wrong answers, doing it the wrong way. People can spend like years on a project and then it just doesn't work because they're bad at it. So that kind of thing is a higher priority problem than increasing your budget or getting rid of overhead. Making sure the things you're spending your budget on are actually valuable and effective. You can get more bang for your buck there.
Yep. So I feel like a little bit in a rock and a hard place type situation, in that this feels great, the following sort of situation. So in my case, I think like the time spent on what we're doing is important because this is like fixing like irrationalities that I've had, or misconceptions, that sort of stuff. Um, I feel like it's higher priority. Well, actually, I guess there's just multiple priorities is one way to think about it. Like, particularly, I'm thinking about this like um, a thing to do that I've put off with regards to like Flux and like an app that's sort of currently in development for a bunch of volunteers. So it's not like a that coordinated. It's somewhat coordinated. Um, anyway, and it's CI/CD stuff, and some of the early CI/CD stuff has taken longer than I expected, and so I'm reasonably close to the end. I might estimate that it's going to take half a day or a day or something to get everything sort of wrapped up if I stay focused. Um, Maybe that's going to be 2 days because of or 3 days or something like that because of overestimation. Um, that not doing that is causing like stress or emotional overhead because or if for no other reason that I like feel like I should do it or want to do it or things like that. Um, like yeah, and it's sort of costing us in that like in it not having there like there's overhead to not having it. Um, but that's a as opposed to like most things that I'm going about, this is like the time that we're spending is really helpful because it's working at that more foundational level that's going to have a much longer payoff. But then this is like a much smaller thing that feels like it's getting in the way of me only now, but it's also like soluble. Um, which I guess the idea that occurs to me is just that there's like multiple layers of priorities there. It's not like um, uh, yeah, like the when I wrote down here like inefficiency coming from irrationality and that being a higher priority, it's only a higher priority insofar as like the things that you're being irrational about. Um, yeah, like I'm not a you know I don't have lots of problems with my coding, for example. I have problems with time management or things, but yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, that's the completion of that idea, I think.
yeah. For irrationality, I'd specify error there. It doesn't necessarily
Mm.
have to be an irrational error. It's just if you're making errors, it can cause failure. And then if you had twice as much budget and you put it into this project and the project fails, the twice as much budget didn't help you because of the error.
Yep.
So error can be a priority over increasing your budget or saving more of it for use or whatever from overhead. Um, and then the broader issue was about, I think in the big picture, it is people take on commitments in their life, they get involved in projects, and they don't have infinite scheduling flexibility. So they're involved with things that are yeah, not totally flexible for when to schedule what you do. And that that limits their control over their schedule, and it makes doing all sorts of things harder, like controlling your burnout or deciding what to do today, because you have extra constraints to deal with, extra requirements.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's a very, very common situation where people, they go through childhood and they're not really committed to stuff, but their parents are controlling their life a lot and they have to go to school and so on. And then they go to college and they get a little bit of a break, and then they start their career and get married and buy a house, and now they have a mortgage, they have to go to work, they have to maintain a relationship with their wife, etc. And all those commitments make it hard to redo their foundations, redo their education, find a bunch of time to make changes. And the thing you have to do there, big picture, is piecemeal change. Because you can fit some time to make progress into your life. For pretty much anyone, even if they're really busy, they can find some opportunities to make improvements. They can drop a few obligations here and there, even if most of them are hard to drop, and they can they can start learning some things and changing a little and just gradually make adjustments more in the direction that they think will be better. And the further you go along, in some ways, the easier it gets as you free up more resources and know more stuff.
Yep.
But
Mhm.
most people, if they're not really young, are not in a position for like really revolutionary changes and just jumping into some different thing like a philosophy all wholeheartedly, and that's hard. And
Yeah. Either that or
but
they have
it
very limited opportunities that crop up during the rest of their life.
yeah, but you can approach things more incrementally. There are various dangers, like people often overestimate how much they've learned and how well they understand it. And then they're like, "Ooh, I learned all this cool stuff, and now I know that all these things in my life are bad, and I should drop them." And they get tempted to like jump way ahead when they don't actually know what life they want to change to and understand it very well and why it would be better and so on. Like they don't really know what they're doing, but they're making big changes. It's like you got a job at a new company, and they're like, "Here's our old code base. The old guy quit. Good luck." And then you look at it for a day and you're like, "Ooh, I know what I should change. I'll make this way better." And you haven't added any unit tests yet, and you haven't read half the code, and you're trying to make big changes, and you're just going to make a mess.
Yep.
But you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I see that it hasn't used this Python design pattern I learned last year. So I should add that everywhere and refactor it because that's an improvement." And you really need to get some sense of the bigger picture and uh, be careful. Be careful with changes. Try to understand what change you're making and why a bit more thoroughly than people sometimes do.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
change can be kind of expensive and hard, and sometimes people underestimate the difficulty of making changes.
I think I don't know, at least in open source I feel like I'm just thinking about changing because particularly in open source you end up with um the weird like with a business it's a lot more acceptable to get an overhead for contributing or changing code bases. Um, but with open source, if you want to implement one feature, then you want as low an overhead as possible. So one question, just because we're the hour, um,
Okay.
splitting activities in terms of uh, like I sort of was thinking about it from a comparative advantage point of view. Um, so, for example, if I use all my uh, creative currency on reading and writing FI stuff or whatever for a day, then I end up getting tired or earlier. But if I saved, say, 20% of that, then that stretches a lot further with like coding. There's more other sorts of things to do. Is splitting focuses like besides just sweeping up inefficiencies and other stuff that we need to do? Is it a good idea to as a way of like maximizing output, I guess?
Yeah, it's often good because the activities do not 100% overlap on what currencies they're using. So you get some benefit there from using different ratios of different currencies. And then also, one of the currencies is raw time.
Hmm.
And if you do really hard stuff and you blow all your mental focus, then what you end up with is a surplus of raw time that's hard to use very effectively. So I have this problem sometimes where I write like 5,000 words and then I'm really tired and I have 8 hours left in the day, and what the fuck am I going to do when I'm too tired to even play a video game
Hmm.
or read a book or something? Um, so I try to avoid that. If you can save like even just 5% of your budget, then that will let you do some low energy things as opposed to actually having run out of. So you can do stuff that's time inefficient but energy efficient. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
low focus cost but takes up more time. You want to save some focus to be able to do those things.
Yep. Yep. That makes sense. All right. Um, I've got a bunch of stuff to think about before next time. One of the things I'm definitely gonna. So the two major goals I've got: keep journaling or start doing that again, and reading the choice, which I've started picking it. I've picked it back up again, but I think that's probably a good thing to resume stuff on.
I was going to suggest thinking over this stuff and grammar, but up to you.
Oh, okay. So, well, this stuff I think is in common. Um, oh, sorry. The journaling was sort of one output
Oh,
of thinking
about
about
this.
this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So I mean, documenting like what I do with the day as well, I think is important. But yeah, but sort of about this. Um, okay. In terms of grammar, what would you suggest then?
Just go through more of the materials in the Gumroad.
Okay, cool. Um, that's sort of easy. I'll start digging into if I, yeah, the new stuff. Or
Okay,
you
great.
reckon dig into stuff or go over old stuff first? I mean, old stuff. Yeah, it's fairly
Either
recent, I
way,
guess.
maybe it depends how tired you are.
Okay, that's fair. All right, sounds good. Um, see you in a few days.
Okay, bye.